Roger, Mudfossil University, and today you, my friends, are the first people in history seeing dark energy. Whoa, 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 Roger, what are you talking about? Well, what I am talking about is this stuff right here, all these little illuminated particles. And you say, whoa, Roger, those are illuminated. I say, yes, they are. And why are they illuminated? Because they are in darkness, which they would have stayed dark, except we penetrated that darkness with a concentrated ray of particles which came through like a sonic boom and forced all the other particles into an instant excitation. We now see the particles that are in the air, which you would call static electricity. They collect on your clothes when they are no longer more attracted to the molecules in the air. They're more attracted to you. This happens when dryness occurs because they're attached to these molecules and they say, if I could find some wetness, I'd get off of you. But, there's a bunch of stuck to you that we really got a potential growing here. We're going to have to get off of here. And they look for wetness. Wetness will absorb it, and the ground will absorb it. These are the things you have to understand. This is always, always, always complete molecules of the ground will suck electrons into them. That's why when you touch a water pipe, you touch anything close to the earth, when you have collected electrons on you, you get a static static discharge. They call it ESD, electrostatic discharge, and it's just electrons, electrostatic. They're just sitting around on top of you, discharge, leaving you and hitting ground. That's all it is. Now, we're going to go into, and these are the dark energy that is in space, because where do these come from? They didn't grow in Never Never Land. They came from the sun. How did they come from the sun? They're electrons that were thrown from the sun in excited orbitals. So, poof, off they go. Spins through space, and bang, it hits the Earth. Case closed. All right, this is my little painting I did to show exactly what's happening. And this is exactly what's happening. You have a sun that's excited, and the reason it's excited primarily is it's rubbing through the ether, being dragged through the ether, which does exist as negative particles in clouds, a literal mass, an ocean of this. And we are plowing through this, being ripped through it by the arms of the Milky Way galaxy. When that happens, all of the planets trailing it are showered with solar winds, and primarily they're radiated electron particles, which are primarily in the radio wave range, is what I've heard now, which are low frequency ones that are more or less a little bit above heat, really. Now, in addition to that, we are being cascaded with heavier particles which are being scourged off the surface of the sun as it spins into the ether. They're being ripped off. Same thing happens to us. Do you know that twice a day when this faces the sun, it compresses the atmosphere because it's pushing against it, and the barometric pressure changes at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. and 4 p.m. Same exact thing every day for the last 400 years. Nobody can figure it out. It is turning into the oncoming ether. Okay, my good mud fossil friends, today starts a new chapter in human history. One small step for mankind, one giant leap for the human mind. Ether is dark matter and dark energy. It's been sitting out there. It's light in transit. It's light. It's light coming from the sun to us in transit. It doesn't have anything to interact with until it bangs into our eyeball or it hits a molecule on the earth that it can vibrate and turn into heat or bounce off of and turn back into little light particles, which are of a lower intensity because it will give off vibration and heat into the particle that it collided with. It's as simple as that. We're looking for it, and it's right there. And it permeates the entire universe. You cannot get away from it. Now, I did never do this. I destroyed a lot of my work here, and I have written in ink. All right, now, here's what we got. Light is dark energy in transit. Energy is nothing more than impact. I don't care what you say, everything that impacts creates energy, and that's the only energy that's ever been created. Energy equals mass. The speed of light has to be taken into account, but it is not a constant. Mass equals the resting mass of a particle times the forward and rotational speeds. That is the mass. Now, they are also affected by the ether that it is in. What's the density of the ether? Is it going through the ether? Is the ether coming at it? Is it coming? How does that affect it? There's a lot of, that's a big effect there. Now, we are being ripped through the solar system through this ether. Now, planets receive both ether and heavy particles, and I'm going to call it heavy ether. Heavy ether is particles that are suspended in space, ripped from solar masses primarily. As they cascade through the ether, it scrubs them and rips particles off, and some of them will be heavier, and some, mostly it'll be electrons because of the heating effect, but there will be heavier particles scourged from the surface. Now, this is the most important thing you have to remember. All surfaces are coated with negative electrons instantaneously. You cannot unpaint them. It's like paint. You have every single thing there is you see is painted with electrons, and you cannot unpaint it. If you scratch it off, the new electrons will jump right in there and take over. It cannot be unpainted. So everything is negative on its surface. So that means as our negatives are cascading through the universe, they're colliding with negatives, which are the particles that are in space. Every single thing has a negative attached on its surface. And electrons, which I believe are the light particles, are just completely negative. So that's you're just crushing into this stuff as you flow through it. And as you spin through it, the same thing. And Venus spins backwards, and it just rubs itself in, and it's heating up to like almost 900 degrees in its atmosphere. And it can't turn either, because it takes 200 days to make one turn on its axis. Now, so we know that all surfaces coated with electrons. Now, all interiors of complete matter, which means any matter that has a nucleus, is a complete matter. So all interiors of that complete matter is constructed of protons and electrons held together firmly, solidly. That is the core. There is no neutrons in my model. As the core achieves internal solid state, which the electrons are literally touching the protons, and they achieve a basic internal neutrality. Additional electrons are still pulled by the strong positive, and I can show that in little toy magnets. I've shown it over and over. They're called attractor beam magnets. They hold the electron at a certain distance, solidly held there. Now, the surface electrons are the key, and they keep new electrons coming towards them at an exact distance according to the nuclear configuration. Whatever the nucleus is determines the distance of the quantum states. That's why they're all different quantum states. And the distance of the electrons surrounding the nucleus is dictated by the internal pull of the positives, but additionally by the amount of negatives. So when you have isotopes that have additional negatives in the core than the positives, so they have, let's say, 10 positives, they have 11 negatives, or 20 negatives they might have. I mean, they can have you build a bunch of negatives, and they're surrounding the positives, basically, it appears to me. I don't think they're like a bar magnet, although they might be. This I cannot tell you. But I do know that well, I don't know 100% for a fact, but this is my statement, is the core is positives and negatives only, no neutrons. Now, so as the core achieves this internal parity, the additional electrons are pulled to the surface, and the electrons stay at exact configuration, at exact distances. Now, electrons are thrown from complete matter as light, as I showed you from the sun. They spin away. And the heat, they're thrown from complete matter as light and heat, but only when they interact with complete matter. So they're just going spinning through space, just having a nice time, not doing anything, because they're not, they have their fields just all to themselves now. all to themselves. As soon as they bump into a field, they compress. Well, they compress in this direction, and they illuminate. It's just what they do, because they're pushing their bubble into a compressed state, which it creates illumination, and that I cannot explain right now. So all energy is collisions. All energy. There is nothing but collisions. Nothing but collisions. When a collision happens, it creates energy. Heat, light, vibration, sound, the whole 9 yards. In space, it's mostly just electrons, and they radiate away from glowing bodies. The glowing bodies only glow because magnetic regions are being invaded. It's the only time they will glow. Right? They're being crushed and violated. Light is the particles, or at least they're hard packets of energy, and I don't know how they are something that will impact with something. Let me put it that way. They're hard packets of energy. Call them light, call them particles, whatever you want to call them. But photons, they're not waves of nothing, massless. They have a mass case closed. And even E equals mc squared, might as well say it right now, E equals mc squared never worked from the day Einstein said it, because if he said photons, which is light, has no mass at all, none, zero. So if you can do math, energy equaling mass times anything means that if there's no mass, there's no energy. So his own equation says light has no energy, which is, I mean, everything he said was not correct. I mean, that's true. It's just nothing he said was right. I'm sorry. It's just a fact. Velikovsky was right about everything. Now, the spin creates a pattern surrounding the particle, which displays as rings of dots. And I have shown this over and over from Rodney Warren's excellent work with light acceleration. The particles have been defined. The particles have defined principles, and they obey the right-hand rule, which means in one direction, which is counterclockwise, they will spin freely as they can. There's still friction, there's still interaction, there's still slowing. But when they spin in the clockwise spin, they are repelled by ether, and it pushes back, and it will actually turn this and spin it backwards. Now, this happens both in the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere. It's because of electron interaction. It has nothing to do with the rotation of the Earth. All right, so this is where we come to the rattleback. So we know that particles have defined principles and they obey the right-hand rule. If they spin backwards, they have no magnetic field, just like Venus, no magnetic field. Same thing with the particle that I show in our light experiments, accelerated particle, brilliantly lit, no magnetic field. I believe it's spinning backwards. Every other one has a big magnetic field, not nearly as lit. Same thing with Venus, exactly identical situation. All right, what we see as light is dark matter and dark energy on its way to us. When we see it, it has collided with our eyeball. They say, oh, if you look at it, it changes the whole thing. Well, of course it changes. It just smacked into your eyeball, shook your eyeball around a little bit and said, hey, I just got hit by light. It doesn't regrow. It did what it did. It's like shooting a bullet. Once it hits the thing, you don't expect to find another bullet there. Of course it's going to change. It's not going to just keep going exactly the same. It hits something and then it bounces, or it heats it up, or whatever. But if it doesn't hit anything, it doesn't hit anything. Then it's just nothing. It's ether. It's potential energy. It's dark energy. It's dark, but it's still there, and it's still energy. It still has a mass, but the mass is not realized until impact. And the mass of impact will change according to what it impacts with and how fast it's going and spinning, and if the impacted material is coming towards it, if the impacted material is highly energetic or highly negative or highly positive, whatever those conditions are will affect the, I'm going to call it gravity, is what it is. Because when a particle impacts with another particle and they become one particle, that's the result of magnetic pull. The whole thing is magnetic. All right, so if I haven't explained it sufficiently, I'm sorry. But I'm going to go into, I'm just going to show a few things that back up the things that I've said. I hope they back them up. If you have any lingering doubts of what I'm saying, I'd appreciate it if you factually talk about them according to what I have presented. Not all the theory says it's a photon and it's just a wavy little particle. Because every time I say to somebody, oh, yeah, no, it's a photon, oh, that's a this and that, and then they start drawing little figures on a board, and nothing makes sense at all. But it's what they were told. So I say, tell me the mechanism. Tell me how it got from there to here if it has no mass. Well, it's a magnetic electrostatic. Well, what is it? What does it consist of? Well, it's radiation. So what does radiation consist of? Well, it's nothing. There's no mass. No mass means there is nothing. It is zero. It is not existent. It's just not there. So you can come up with all the theories you want and explain all the things you want to do with all these little squiggly lines and pi symbols and tangential sequence. I mean, it just gets insane when they start going into these things. It takes hours to explain something. By the time you're done, you're just on the floor. So, I just explained to you everything there is to know about light. And it explains every single interaction, every single one, even up to atomic bombs. All right, I'm going to show you right now. All right, as far as the ether goes and banging into things, that is energy, and that's what I said was, oh, there's nothing but that, but that's not necessarily true. There's chemical energy where bonding and disassociation create different types of luminescence and energies that are quite obvious. So it's not, but they end up banging into something once they're created, is what I'm saying. After that, it becomes impact. Now, I have no clue about fusion and fission and that depth. That I can't address, but I can tell you one thing. It all has to be completely re-examined, because if you take into account what I'm saying, if you believe in the ether, and if you believe that the nuclear core could possibly be completely flooded with electrons, which is my statements, then everything has to be started from scratch again. That's my statement. Okay, this is again real old for all of us that have been paying attention. This is the laser pulse red laser wave coming through the air in a darkened environment, exciting the ether static electrons that are in the air. This is the same wave being sucked through the Venturi accelerator, turning into white little particles. You have to go up on my on Mud Fossil University to see all these videos. I've done this dozens of times, and it's really getting old to me. These are the particle sprays that come out, and that's exactly what makes that wave, that pattern on the back that looks like interference pattern. It's not. It's a spinning particle cutting through this way, or if it spins the other side, it goes off that way. That's all it is. And they crush into each other's regions. They literally are not existing as a particle at this point. They are plasma. When they come out of each other's regions, they just say, "Get the hell away from me," and then they break down about here. They say, "Woof, thank God," and then they start turning into their own particle waves, and then those particle waves begin to exhibit magnetic fields around them, which is this. They're coming at us, and these little particle waves, and then they hit the ether of unrestricted space, because they were restricted in that Venturi, and they had to crush each other, and they were all touching each other, literally almost. And they say, "This is not. I got to get out of here." And then they poof, and when they come out, and these excited particle carriers, these charged particles, they hit the ether, and poof, they pop into these fields. And then you get all of those little bitty dots all the way around, which is the polarized ether. And then if one field crushes another field, they'll compress and they will give off a different color. This particle is what I think is the accelerated reverse particle that is going backwards, and that's why you don't see any field around it. These have fields. The particle is in the center. It's so tiny that you'd never see it. But this one here is glowing, and there is no field. It's going backwards. Venus does the identical same thing. This is accelerated light, and there's nobody on the face of the planet can tell me that that light did not accelerate. Because if you have any common sense whatsoever, you see that this is the wave, and then you see that wave doing this, and you say, "Oh, that could be anything. Oh, it doesn't mean anything." Well, if that doesn't mean anything to you, then nothing will mean anything to you. So that's all I got to say about that. Now, we know about the rainbow shower. Then we see this. This is very interesting. That white particle created another something. And this is, I don't know, and it almost looks like it's sucking power out of the other waves. Something needs to be investigated. I have no clue about that. Now, the right-hand rule, very nicely shown by Rodney. Oops, so that's through this is through glass, and when light comes through glass, there's more restriction, and it builds a bubble like that coming through. Through air, it doesn't. You don't see that, but through glass, it has a more of a. I believe it was glass. Might have been water. Rodney did all this stuff. He was very, very powerful, powerful stuff. Where is the blue trail? There it is, blue trail. Now, that is the electron spinning to the right, drifting to the left, and I believe this is a segment in between where it's accelerated and it displays its Higgs field. And it is just, at this point, a raw electron trying to come back into compression. See how they're compressed up here versus, I don't know if you can see that on this camera, but anyway, that's how it works. And it drifts left, that means it's spinning to the right. That's the right-hand rule. That is exactly what it's supposed to do. So I think you've seen pretty much what I have to show you as far as light goes, that I claim is what supports the things I am saying. And ether is the primary support, and exactly what I've been showing over and over and over and over. And it is right there. It's right there. That's the ether. That's the ether. And that's in space everywhere you look in the universe, because everything is glowing, it's sending that stuff out. It's just going, it doesn't stop, there's nothing there. It is filling the universe with these ether particles. Now, it's not dense like this. They're spitting out into space. And our whole, around our globe, the entire thing is completely encased with ions, and even ions are electrons, and they start up at a certain number of miles out into space, and then they flood that, because Earth does not necessarily need all those electrons, or those electrons might be just rubbing through those electrons, and they're not being shot at us like the ones from the sun. This I am not certain of. And I don't even know if the ones shot at us from the sun are the reason it's so hot, because the only time you get real hot is when you're facing the sun, and that is hitting us with the particles being thrown at us from crushing into the ether. All right, because I told you there's 4 different cycles. There's high barometer pressure twice a day, obviously going to happen, 24-hour day. It's 10 a.m., 10 p.m. I believe that was, and 4 a.m., 4 p.m. is the low points, when it's again went away from the impact of the ether. That's all I can tell you. That's what I'm seeing, and it all makes sense once you take into ether. Now, let's get all the way, because I tell you what, I'm going to tell you what, anybody on the face of the planet, come to me with any electronic interaction, and I would like to see it, because I can explain it with ether. All right, now I'm going to show you the one last thing that I can explain with ether, which is the only thing you will ever see with a positive surface. It's an atomic bomb. All right, if you know how an atomic bomb works, you have a nuclear core, which is very, very dense. It's a heavy core. Now, they claim there's a lot of neutrons in there. I say no. I say there's a lot of electrons, a ton of electrons. They are holding the positives, and the reason you have such instability when you get up into these extreme numbers of protons is because they are surrounded by electrons, but there is so many electrons that they exceed the protons by a great deal in some cases, and they are so excessive that they're just shaking, and there's so many extra ones that they want to get out of there. Really, they're almost ready to fall apart right now. That's why they have this reactivity, this decay, because they will spit out of there. They just don't want it, but there's too many of them too close in the center. Now, once you take a nuclear explosion, they force these things together, and now they're adding hydrogen in there, which is the most explosive, and that's going to throw out protons, because that ionizes into protons. So that stuff will go along with the electron radiation, and that's serious. And then what you have left over after that is all of the negatives will go away, because they all push in like balloons, and they all leave it instantaneously. And you see that white display. It's not very hard to see. Then the next thing that happens is the nuclear core itself is now positive. There's no electrons left. So the explosions here, we know there's a good explosion, we know there's a shock wave coming out, and wow, that's whole thing, and the wind comes and all that. Well, of course it's going to. However, the explosion now starts to go up in the air. Why is that? Why would it go straight up in the air? And why is it making these rings of ionized gases out here? Ionized gases means something, the electrons made it vaporize. And they make them vaporize in almost like quantum distances. Now, why is this thing going straight up in the air, and why is it still brilliantly lit when it gets way up in the air, and why is it pulling the mushroom cloud back into itself? I'll explain all those things, and I'll explain them to you now, and then as you watch you can understand. The reason is it's forced all the electrons in, boop, they all leave. Now you got a positive core. The Earth is positive. The core is being repelled. It's going straight up in the air, and as it does, it pulls everything up with it that has lost its electrons as well. They're all going up here together, and it starts glowing like crazy. And why is it glowing? It is glowing because it is reconstituting its normal matter from positive only back to positives and negatives. Now, at that point, the nuclear particles will reconstitute. Some of them will have broken down and become different materials, but most of them will just have lost their electrons, and then they'll fuse back in a whole batch of electrons and become mostly what they were before. But watch as it goes, and here's what happens. Now, this is just on the internet, on atomic bomb blast explosion on YouTube. So here we go. All right, there's your brilliant light. Everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. There's your ionized gases in the air. There's your nuclear core glowing like hell, straight up off the Earth because it's now positive. Still continues to glow. Still continues to pull all that stuff right back into itself. It says, you got any electrons out there? And as they rub the electrons out of the sky, they pull them right back in. That is the nature of a nuclear bomb blast, and that illustrates the negativity that has been lost, the positivity that has been gained, the altitude and the repulsion that is obviously seen, the reconstitution and glow that is obviously seen. Mud Fossil University, where you want to go to get the truth on all this stuff. We pay attention to the little details. The little details are what have been left out and just not even considered. They'd rather think about wormholes and things like that. There's absolutely no clue about. And the things that we can look at and study and come up with answers, they're just ignored.